The Silent Guardian. A dog's journey from abandoned to healer. Have you ever looked into the eyes of a creature who has lost everything, yet somehow still believes in goodness? I wasn't prepared for it that rainy Tuesday, the moment when a pair of amber eyes would silently ask if humans were still worth trusting, even after one had thrown him away like garbage. The rain hammered against my windshield as I pulled into the gas station. Lightning flashed, illuminating the world in harsh white bursts. That's when I saw it, a cardboard box dissolving in the downpour near the dumpster, and something moving inside, something alive. I almost didn't stop. Almost told myself someone else would help, that I was already late. But those eyes caught mine through the rain. Steady, watchful, impossibly dignified despite everything. The box was falling apart, soaked through completely. Inside, a German Shepherd puppy, maybe 4 months old, sat perfectly still, as though movement might cost him what little shelter remained. His fur was matted against his thin frame, ears too large for his head. But what broke my heart was the red bandana clutched between his teeth, faded, fraying at the edges, held with such gentle determination that I knew immediately it was all he had left. It didn't bark when I approached, didn't whimper, just watched me with those eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of a much older soul. The rain plastered my hair to my face as I crouched down, unsure what to do next. "Hey there," I whispered, extending my hand slowly. The puppy didn't move toward me, but he didn't retreat either. He just held my gaze, the bandana still carefully gripped in his mouth. I noticed a piece of paper, mostly dissolved by rain, stuck to the side of the box. Only 2 words remained legible: sorry and echo. People rushed past us, hurrying between their cars and the store, heads down against the storm. No one stopped. No one seemed to notice the cardboard box or its precious cargo slowly drowning in the rain. I sat down right there on the wet pavement, rain soaking through my jeans. "I'm not going anywhere," I told him softly. We stayed like that, me sitting, him watching, for what felt like forever. The rain lessened to a drizzle. My clothes were soaked through. The store clerk came out once, looked at us curiously, then went back inside. Still, I waited. I had a granola bar in my pocket. Carefully, I unwrapped it and broke off a piece, placing it on the ground between us. The puppy's nose twitched, but he didn't move. The bandana remained firmly in his mouth, like letting it go might erase whatever memory it carried. "It's okay," I said. "Take your time." More minutes passed. Finally, the puppy set the bandana down, gently, reverently, and took a single step forward. He sniffed the granola piece, then looked back at me as if asking permission. When I nodded, he delicately took the food and retreated, picking the bandana back up immediately afterward. The rain had stopped completely when I finally spoke again. "Echo," I said, testing the name. "Is that you?" His ears twitched forward at the sound. Recognition. "Echo," I repeated. "I think you've been waiting long enough." I opened my jacket, creating a small shelter. "Come on, buddy. Let's go home." For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then Echo took one uncertain step forward. Another. When he reached me, he didn't leap into my arms or lick my face. He simply pressed his head against my knee, the bandana still held carefully in his mouth, and sighed, a sound so soft and relieved it made my throat tighten. I wrapped my jacket around his trembling body and lifted him gently. He weighed almost nothing. The box he'd been abandoned in had disintegrated completely now, merging with the wet pavement like it had never existed at all. In the car, Echo sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, bandana still clutched in his mouth. He didn't look around curiously like most puppies would. Instead, he stared straight ahead, his body tense, as though afraid to believe this was real. "You're safe now," I told him, though I wasn't sure he believed me. "You're never going back there." I promise. The drive home felt eternal. At each stoplight I glanced over, half expecting him to have vanished. But he remained, this small miracle who had entered my life through a dissolving cardboard box. When we pulled into my driveway, I turned off the engine and just sat for a moment. "Welcome home, Echo," I whispered. Inside, I set up a makeshift bed using an old fleece blanket and placed a bowl of water nearby. Echo approached cautiously, sniffed the water, and drank with slow, deliberate sips. When he finished, he carried his bandana to the blanket and curled around it protectively. I moved around the house quietly, giving him space while preparing some chicken and rice. He watched my every movement, his eyes never leaving me for long, as though I might disappear if he blinked. That night, I slept on the couch to stay close to him. Every few hours, I'd wake up to check if he was still there. Each time I found him watching me too, his eyes reflecting the dim night light from the hallway. Around dawn, I felt something touch my hand. I opened my eyes to find Echo standing beside the couch, the red bandana laid carefully on the cushion next to me. He wasn't giving it up, not yet, but sharing it, an offering of tentative trust. My heart squeezed painfully in my chest. "Thank you," I whispered. He blinked slowly, then curled up on the floor against the couch, his back pressed to the furniture as if needing to feel something solid and unchanging. Morning arrived with gentle sunlight filtering through the blinds. Echo was still there, still real, his head resting on his paws. For the first time, he looked peaceful, as though sleep had finally claimed him after days of vigilance. I moved quietly to the kitchen and prepared his breakfast. When I returned, he was sitting up, watching the doorway. Not scared anymore, just waiting. I set the bowl down and stepped back. He ate slowly, methodically, like someone who had learned that food wasn't guaranteed. After breakfast, I sat on the floor and just talked to him. Not expecting responses, just wanting him to know my voice, to understand he was home. "I work at the Animal Rehabilitation Center," I explained. "I see a lot of dogs who've been abandoned, but never quite like you. Never one who waited so patiently, who held onto something so carefully." As I spoke, Echo inched closer, each movement deliberate and silent. When he finally reached me, he didn't jump or bark. He simply rested his head against my leg, the lightest of touches, as if asking if this connection was allowed. I placed my hand gently on his back. "You're safe now, Echo. You're home." He stayed there for a long time, just breathing, just being. No demands, no exuberance, just quiet presence. Like he was finally allowing himself to believe. Over the next few days, we settled into a rhythm. Echo followed me from room to room, never more than a few steps behind. If I stopped, he stopped. If I sat, he lay beside me. The bandana remained his constant companion, carried gently in his mouth or laid beside him when he slept. At night, he slept by the couch. During the day, he'd curl up near my desk while I worked on rehabilitation plans for the shelter dogs. Sometimes, I'd catch him looking out the window, his eyes fixed on the distance, as though part of him was still waiting, still wondering. I didn't push him. I let him be exactly who he was, a puppy carrying more history than most humans, learning how to trust again one moment at a time. Everything changed when Maria visited. She coordinated the therapy dog program at the rehabilitation center, working with hospitals and crisis centers. Maria, experienced with traumatized animals, immediately knelt down, avoiding direct eye contact. "Hello, little one," she said softly. "You have brave eyes." Echo watched her for a long moment, then slowly approached, head low, shoulders tense. To my amazement, he gently pressed his nose to her hand, still clutching his bandana. Maria remained perfectly still. "He's remarkable," she said without looking up. "Truly special." "Special?" I asked. Some dogs bark for attention. Some hide from pain, she explained. But this one, he moves toward it. That's rare, Olivia. Really rare. That night, her words kept replaying in my mind. Special, rare, moves toward pain. I watched Echo curled up with his bandana and wondered if he was meant for something more than just surviving. The next morning I called Maria about evaluating Echo for therapy work. It's unusual for one so young, she warned. And with his background, just meet with him, I said. There's something about him. She sent a trainer the following week. Echo surprised everyone with his calm demeanor and quick learning. Basic commands, leash walking, sitting quietly. He mastered them all. The trainer was amazed. Most rescued dogs, especially puppies abandoned so young. They're reactive, anxious, she said. Echo acts like he's been waiting for this purpose his whole life. 6 months later, Echo received his therapy dog certification. I registered him with the outreach program, and we scheduled our first visit. A children's grief support group. Children who had lost parents, siblings, homes. Some hadn't spoken in months. I was nervous driving there. Echo sat in the passenger seat, larger now but still with those same watchful eyes. His red bandana, once clutched constantly in his mouth, now worn properly around his neck. A badge of his journey. When we walked into that room of quiet, grieving children, something in Echo changed. His ears went forward, his posture straightened, and with gentle certainty, he walked straight to a small boy in the corner. The child, maybe 6 years old, hadn't spoken since losing his mother 3 months ago. He sat clutching a worn photograph, eyes downcast. Echo sat beside him, not demanding attention, just offering presence. After several minutes, the boy looked up. Their eyes met. Slowly, the child reached out one hand and touched Echo's ear. Echo leaned in slightly, encouraging the connection. The therapist later told me it was the first time the boy had willingly touched anyone since his loss. After that first visit, everything shifted. Echo wasn't just my rescued puppy anymore. He was becoming something more. A silent healer, moving through spaces of grief and trauma with a wisdom that seemed impossible for his young age. We began regular visits to hospitals, schools, crisis centers. Each time, the pattern was the same. Echo would enter quietly, respectfully, and somehow find the person who needed him most. The one whose pain was the deepest, whose isolation was the most complete. Word spread. Teachers, counselors, therapists called us. They didn't want just any therapy dog. They wanted Echo. Through it all, he never changed at home. Wolf. Wanted ever changed at home. Still slept near my bed. Still followed me room to room. Still carried his bandana when we weren't working. There was one visit I'll never forget. A juvenile detention center where most of the teens had experienced more trauma than anyone should in a lifetime. Many were hardened, angry, untrusting of adults, and the system that had failed them repeatedly. Echo entered the common room with his usual calm presence. The teens were skeptical, some openly hostile. One boy, Marcus, sat alone in the corner, arms crossed tightly, hoodie pulled low over his face. The rage radiating from him was almost tangible. Echo walked past everyone else and went directly to him. Marcus didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him. The room went quiet, watching. Echo sat beside Marcus's chair, waiting patiently. Minutes passed. Then, in a gesture I'd never seen before, Echo reached up and pulled his bandana loose with his teeth. With deliberate gentleness, he placed it on Marcus's shoe. The silence in the room deepened. Marcus stared at the bandana, then at Echo. "What's he doing?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "He's never done that before. That bandana is his most precious possession. Marcus reached down slowly and picked up the fabric. "Why me?" he whispered, more to himself than to us. Echo pressed his head against the boy's leg. After a moment's hesitation, Marcus placed his hand on Echo's head. "I had a dog once," he said, his voice barely audible, "before everything went bad." Echo stayed beside him for the entire visit. When it was time to leave, Marcus tried to return the bandana. I shook my head. "I think he wants you to keep it," I said. Marcus looked down at the faded red fabric in his hands. "But it's his. It matters to him." "Yes," I agreed. "That's why the gift matters too." On the drive home, Echo was quieter than usual. He sat in the passenger seat, neck bare where the bandana had been for so long. I reached over and touched his head gently. "You did something important today," I told him. He leaned into my touch, sighing softly. The detention center called the next week. Marcus had asked to join their new dog training program, the first positive engagement he'd shown in months. He wore the red bandana around his wrist every day. In the years that followed, Echo touched hundreds of lives. Children facing terminal illness, veterans battling PTSD, elderly patients lost in dementia. He moved through their worlds with quiet grace, offering connection without demand, presence without pressure. He grew from that thin, abandoned puppy into a handsome, dignified adult dog. His amber eyes remained watchful, wise beyond his years, but the wariness had long since disappeared. In its place was purpose, a deep understanding of his unique gift. People often asked me how I trained him to be so intuitive, so gentle with those in pain. The truth was, I hadn't. Echo had been shaped by his own abandonment, his own waiting in that dissolving box in the rain. He knew what it meant to be forgotten, to hold on to something precious while the world moved past. And somehow, that knowledge had transformed into wisdom rather than bitterness. There are dogs who run and play, who bark and jump with exuberance. Echo was never that dog. He moved through the world with quiet intention, with a stillness that created space for others to heal. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was listening. His stillness wasn't absence, it was presence in its purest form. I think about that rainy day often. How easy it would have been to drive past that dissolving box, to tell myself someone else would stop, that it wasn't my responsibility. I think about how close Echo came to being another statistic, another forgotten soul. Instead, he became a healer, not just for the hundreds of people he comforted through our therapy work, but for me too. Before Echo, I'd grown cynical at the rehabilitation center, seeing too many cases of neglect and cruelty. I'd started to doubt whether humanity deserved the loyalty that dogs so freely offer. Echo restored my faith, not just in dogs' capacity to forgive, but in the human capacity to change. I saw it in Marcus, who eventually graduated from high school, while in detention and went on to work with rescue dogs himself. I saw it in the silent child who began speaking again after meeting Echo, in the veteran who finally slept through the night with Echo lying beside his wheelchair. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at the crisis center following a natural disaster, Echo and I sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset. He rested his head on my lap, his body relaxed, at peace. "You know what I've learned from you?" I asked him, stroking his ears. "That sometimes the deepest healing doesn't come from fighting the pain or running from it. It comes from sitting with it, acknowledging it, and still choosing connection." Echo looked up at me with those amber eyes that had seen too much, and somehow transformed it all into compassion. In that moment, I understood that his greatest gift wasn't just his ability to comfort others. It was his decision, made anew each day, to believe in goodness despite knowing abandonment. The red bandana that had meant so much to him had long since found a new purpose with Marcus. Echo no longer needed that physical tether to his past. He had transformed his wound into a bridge, his loss into connection. There's a saying that rescued dogs know they've been rescued and are especially grateful. With Echo, it was different. It wasn't gratitude that drove him to comfort a dying child or sit beside an elder lost in the fog of dementia. It was recognition. One soul who had known suffering recognizing it in another and saying without words, "You are not alone in this. Some lessons can only be taught by those who have lost everything and still found the courage to trust again." Echo taught me that real strength isn't about power or resilience or even survival. It's about vulnerability, the willingness to remain open-hearted in a world that has given you every reason to close down. He taught me that sometimes the most profound response to being broken is to become a healer, not despite the brokenness, but because of it. That our deepest wounds, when transformed rather than denied, become our greatest gifts to offer others. Echo never sought the spotlight. He didn't perform tricks or demand attention. He simply moved through the world with quiet dignity, creating space for healing wherever he went. In his gentle presence, people found permission to be exactly as they were, grieving, afraid, angry, lost, and to trust that they were still worthy of connection. He reminded me that love isn't always loud or demonstrative. Sometimes it's as quiet as sitting beside someone in their darkest moment. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, without words, "I see you. I am here. You matter." All because on a rainy Tuesday, a puppy sat perfectly still in a dissolving box, holding onto a faded red bandana and waiting, not for rescue, perhaps, but for recognition, for someone to look into his eyes and see not just what he had endured, but what he could become. So if you're listening to this story and your heart feels even slightly moved, I have a request. Look for the quiet ones, the ones waiting patiently in shelters, the ones who don't bark for attention or perform for treats, the ones whose eyes hold stories they cannot tell but will show you, if you take the time to see. Your Echo is out there, behind shelter bars in a foster home, or maybe, like mine was, in a cardboard box in the rain. They're holding on with both paws to whatever matters most to them, waiting for someone to stop, to see, to understand. Be the one who stops. Be the one who stays. Because sometimes, in saving them, you save yourself too. And together, you might just help heal a piece of the world. Thank you for listening to Echo's story. If you've had a special experience with a dog who changed your life, please share it in the comments below. Each story reminds us of the extraordinary bond between humans and dogs, and how much we have to learn from these silent teachers who ask so little and give so much. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that celebrate the healing power of the human-animal connection.